My name is Jane Wilson, and by the age of 32, I had done something my father, Robert Wilson, believed to be statistically impossible. I built a $25 million business from the ground up. No college degree, no inherited capital, just relentless, grinding effort in the chaotic world of e-commerce. You might think reaching that level of financial success would be the ultimate validation, especially from your own family. You'd be wrong. For years, I was the quiet pillar holding up the financial stability of my family. Yet I was simultaneously the punchline, the cautionary tale, the uneducated one. We grew up in Portland, Oregon, a city that loves to think of itself as liberal and forward-thinking. But in my father's house, the values were strictly 1950s Ohio. My father was a career accountant at the same respectable firm for 3 decades. His worldview was simple, solid, and utterly rigid. Success was a formula. It required a 4-year degree, preferably an MBA, a steady ascent up the corporate ladder, and a pension plan. Anything outside that lane was risky, irresponsible, and ultimately juvenile. My mother, Eleanor, an elementary school teacher, was the gentle echo of his dogma. She never overtly criticized, but her worried sigh when I mentioned my business plans spoke volumes. I knew I was different from my siblings, Mark and Sarah, almost before I could tie my own shoes. They were good at following the rules. They excelled in the right clubs, got the right internships, and followed the approved blueprint. Me? At 10, while other kids were building blanket forts, I was running an intricate, multi-tiered lemonade stand operation. Premium flavors, loyalty cards, and a sophisticated inventory system scrawled on graph paper. By 13, I was the neighborhood's unofficial tech support, fixing viruses and cracked screens, charging $20 an hour when the local geek squad wanted $75. My parents watched these ventures with a kind of amused dismissal, like watching a pet hamster run on its wheel. Jane needs to focus on her GPA, Robert, my mother would say. These little projects won't pay for her retirement. That judgment followed me into high school and culminated in a massive, family-shattering blow-up the moment I suggested dropping out of community college. I had enrolled purely to appease them. 1 semester was enough to confirm my deepest suspicion. The classroom felt like a gilded cage. The business professors taught concepts that were 5 years outdated, delivered by people who had never successfully launched a company of their own. I was already running a small online store selling customized phone cases, netting me a couple $1,000s before my 19th birthday. When I told my parents I was leaving school to chase the idea that would eventually become Artisan Bridge, the house shook with my father's fury. "You are throwing your life away," he roared, his face mottled red. "You will be a college dropout, working minimum wage forever. No child of mine will be an embarrassment." It was an immediate, unqualified rejection. I left at 19 with $2,000 and a burning desire to prove that ambition and grit trumped a piece of paper. The truth is that memory, the sheer disappointment and rage in his eyes, fueled every 18-hour day, every failed venture, and every ramen noodle dinner for the next decade. Their disapproval didn't crush me, it galvanized me. But what I didn't realize until much later was that while I was building a successful company, I was also unknowingly digging a deeper and deeper chasm of resentment within my own family. The stage was set for a confrontation that would make that long-ago argument feel like a friendly chat. The time was coming, and it was going to happen at the head of a mahogany dining table, under the guise of celebration. Robert Wilson's 65th birthday was 3 weeks away, and I finally had the number, $25 million, that I thought would command respect. I was about to find out exactly what it cost. Leaving home at 19 felt like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. That first year wasn't a journey of success. It was a brutal masterclass in survival. I rented a tiny, miserable studio apartment in an area of Portland where the streetlights always flickered and you never, ever did laundry after sunset. My diet consisted primarily of instant noodles, generic brand cereal, and discounted bruised produce. I worked 18 hours a day, fueled by cheap coffee and the relentless memory of my father's shouted words, "Minimum wage forever." That became my personal mantra, the fear that I was fighting to outrun. My first 3 ventures failed spectacularly, and each failure was a lesson 1,000 times more valuable than any textbook. I lost every penny I had on a drop-shipping business when the overseas suppliers sent mountains of defective junk. That taught me logistics, supply chain management, and the terrifying cost of cutting corners. Next, I tried a social media management service. Burned out in 6 months by underpricing my work and agreeing to impossible demands from too many clients. Lesson learned: boundaries and client contracts are non-negotiable. Then came a fleeting, desperate attempt at handmade jewelry that couldn't scale beyond 2 or 3 sales at a local market. Lesson learned: scalability is everything. Every time I lost money, every time a concept crashed and burned, my parents' voice, specifically my father's, echoed in my head. Yet, it also deepened my commitment. College had promised theoretical safety. The real world delivered painful, yet invaluable, practical wisdom. I was learning about contract law by being sued, learning finance by staring at an empty bank account, and learning marketing by failing to sell anything. The turning point wasn't a lightning bolt of genius. It was exhaustion meeting opportunity. At a dreary local networking event, I met Victoria, a woman 20 years my senior who had already had 2 successful tech exits. She saw the grit under the grime, the ambition shining through the fatigue. Victoria became the mentor I desperately needed. Someone who understood that education comes in many forms. The best learning, she told me over lukewarm diner coffee, happens when the stakes are real. You're learning to build the ship while it's sinking, Jane. That's worth 3 Harvard degrees. With her guidance, I refined my vision. I noticed the growing trend of supporting domestic manufacturing and small businesses. The desire for American-made quality that mass retailers couldn't provide. At 22, I launched Artisan Bridge, an e-commerce platform designed to connect small American manufacturers, craftsmen, and artisans directly with customers who valued quality and origin. The early days demanded sacrifice that felt impossible. I converted half of my even smaller, slightly less miserable new apartment into a makeshift office. My futon was my couch, my bed, and sometimes my desk. I handled the website code, the customer service calls, the negotiations with the first handful of vendors. 8 months in, the breakthrough arrived. A major lifestyle blog featured one of our handcrafted leather goods partners. The resulting order deluge was terrifying. I worked 72 hours straight, scaling our servers and fulfilling orders until my fingers bled from typing. That single feature brought in $15,000 in revenue, more money than I had ever controlled. I called home, adrenaline still pumping, expecting a sliver of pride. "That's nice, honey," my father said, the caution in his voice thick enough to chew. "But those internet things are just temporary luck. You know you can always go back to college when this runs its course." The words stung a familiar, deep ache, but this time they didn't crush me. They focused me. I would prove him wrong, not with an argument, but with undeniable, quantifiable, enduring success. That single, dismissive phone call fueled the next 5 years of relentless, all-consuming growth. The next 5 years were a relentless, dizzying climb. Artisan Bridge expanded from 27 artisan partners in the Pacific Northwest to over 500 manufacturers and craftspeople across all 50 states. We became the bridge, the essential middleman connecting dedicated domestic producers with a hungry consumer base. My professional life was a whirlwind of logistics, negotiations, and crisis management. There were server crashes during major holiday promotions, requiring me to pull 48-hour shifts with my development team. There were predatory competitors trying to poach our top sellers, demanding cross-country trips to personally reassure partners and restructure commission models. The second year almost killed the business. We were growing too fast, bleeding cash flow to cover inventory and staffing needs that outpaced our capital base. I stopped taking a salary for 4 months, moved into a cheaper place, and negotiated painful extended payment terms with every supplier. It was a terrifying period, but it taught me the kind of fiscal discipline that no MBA program could replicate. We survived, and the growth trajectory resumed its sharp ascent. We hit major milestones fast. Our first downtown office space, hiring the first dozen employees, and then the moment I celebrated alone in my quiet office with a single glass of champagne, crossing $2 million in annual revenue. But while the business thrived, my relationship with my family remained frozen in that moment of rejection. They knew I had that website business that was doing okay, but I consistently downplayed the true scale. Their initial dismissal had erected an invisible, painful barrier. I longed for them to ask a detailed question, to show genuine curiosity, to acknowledge the weight of my work. But those questions never came. Instead, the small talk revolved around Mark's steady ascent in corporate law and Sarah's expected promotion at her finance firm. Despite the emotional distance, the financial ties remained strong and entirely one-sided. I couldn't cut them off. That was the paradox of my success. The money was the only way I knew how to demonstrate my love, since my career path was unacceptable. The first major instance came during year 4, just as Artisan Bridge was stabilizing into a profitable enterprise. My mother, Eleanor, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. The insurance was decent, but the out-of-pocket costs and specialized treatments quickly piled up. I quietly, anonymously, channeled $90,000 directly to the hospital and specialist accounts, making sure the bills vanished before they hit my parents' mailbox. My father mentioned a miraculous insurance settlement that had saved them from financial ruin, never once suspecting the source. He just kept thanking the insurance gods. Then there was Mark, my older brother, the corporate lawyer. He was struggling with the down payment for a house in a desirable Seattle suburb. He was $50,000 short, a gap his respectable salary couldn't bridge quickly. I created a complex, arm's-length family loan through a distant, secondary account, giving it the appearance of a timely inheritance from a rarely mentioned relative. Mark gratefully accepted the funds, all while continuing to offer unsolicited career advice to me about finding a real job with benefits and stability. Finally, my sister Sarah was planning her dream wedding, the kind that required a venue deposit that vanished overnight. 6 months before the ceremony, her fiancé, David, lost his job. The wedding was jeopardized. I covered the $60,000 shortfall for the venue, catering, and a lavish honeymoon. Sarah knew the money came from me, but at family gatherings, she always minimized it, calling it a generous contribution from Jane's little internet side hustle that had a good quarter. The total was nearing $350,000 over 5 years, a quiet, secret foundation I had built for them without any recognition, merely hoping that my financial support would compensate for my lack of a college diploma. This disconnect, managing a multi-million-dollar company by day and fielding texts from family who treated me like a lucky dropout by night, was creating an agonizing, internal rift that had to eventually break. The invisible cage I was living in felt increasingly suffocating. By day, I was Jane Wilson, the CEO. I was leading strategy meetings, negotiating with major retail chains for exclusive partnerships, and making decisions that directly impacted the livelihoods of over 50 employees and hundreds of small business owners across America. By night, I became Jane, the college dropout, expected to stay silent and listen to my siblings discuss their real careers over family dinner. The company was thriving. We had recently moved the headquarters to a full, spacious floor in a gleaming downtown Portland office building. We had 38 full-time employees, robust health benefits, and a thriving internship program. Our valuation, solidified after a feature in Business Insider brought attention from several key institutional investors, had stabilized at $25 million. I had retained majority ownership, turning down acquisition offers that would have made me instantly, passively rich, simply because I wasn't ready to let go of the vision. As Robert's 65th birthday approached, I felt the internal pressure peak. It wasn't about boasting, it was about tearing down the misconception that had shadowed my entire adult life. I needed the respect that came with being seen, truly seen, for my achievements. I decided the birthday dinner was the time. I wouldn't just tell them, I would present the irrefutable evidence. I didn't buy him a watch or a set of golf clubs. I purchased a substantial, fully funded retirement investment account, enough to give both him and Eleanor genuine, worry-free comfort for the rest of their lives. I planned to present the documentation along with the full, transparent truth about Artisan Bridge. The night before the dinner, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, rehearsing the speech. I practiced saying, "We're valued at $25 million, Dad," with confidence, not defensiveness. I rehearsed explaining our impact on American manufacturing, the jobs we created, the real economic substance behind the Internet thing. I was no longer the uncertain 19-year-old seeking permission. I was a successful entrepreneur who had created something real. Surely, this level of achievement would finally earn the respect I craved. The evening of the party began, deceptively, pleasantly. Their house, the same house where I had grown up, lined with the same photos, decorated with the same conservative, comfortable furniture, looked exactly as I remembered. The only new addition was a massive, conspicuously placed smart TV that Mark had purchased, an unspoken symbol of his successful contribution. My mother, Eleanor, greeted me with her usual restrained affection, a quick, slightly awkward hug and a comment about my hair. "You look nice, Jane. Did you cut it recently?" It was the same cut I'd had for 2 years. Mark arrived with his wife, Heather, both impeccably dressed in a kind of crisp, business casual attire that subtly screams upper management. Sarah and David came shortly after, with Sarah immediately launching into the details of her recent promotion at the finance firm. "The partners are already hinting at junior partner next year," she announced, the youngest in firm history. "It's all about the degree, you know." Throughout the pre-dinner conversation, my career received not a single inquiry. When David briefly mentioned seeing an article about e-commerce growth, Mark quickly steered the conversation back to his son's Little League championship. I sat there, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, feeling like a silent footnote at my own family's gathering, a temporary guest allowed entry only because I was blood. The weight of the secret, the thousands of dollars I had poured into their lives, felt like a lead cloak. I just needed the dessert course to arrive so I could finally rip it off. Dinner was Eleanor's famous pot roast, served on the good china reserved only for holidays and significant events. Robert, seated at the head of the table, accepted compliments about his youthful 65 with practiced modesty. He seemed genuinely content, the picture of the successful, traditional family patriarch. 65 looks good on you, Dad, Mark said, raising his water glass. Here's to another 20 years at the firm, or at least a comfortable retirement. The moment finally arrived as the cake was brought out. I had patiently endured discussions about neighborhood gossip, Mark's son's private school tuition, and Sarah's upcoming Caribbean cruise. No one had asked a single, substantive question about my life or my business. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Dad, Mom, everyone, I began, my voice clear and steady despite the internal tremor. I wanted to share some news about Artisan Bridge. Robert nodded absently, already reaching for a slice of cake. That's nice, Janie. The company was recently valued at $25 million, I continued, pushing the words out with deliberate force. We've had several acquisition offers, and I was recently featured in Business Insider and Entrepreneur magazine. The silence that followed was heavy, immediate, and utterly hostile. Eleanor froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Sarah and David exchanged a quick, shocked look. Mark simply stared at the table, a slight tension pulling at the corner of his jaw. Robert was the first to speak, his tone immediately dismissive, tinged with disbelief. Valued? What exactly does that mean, Jane? These internet businesses use all sorts of funny math to come up with these valuations. It's just speculative. I fought to maintain my composure. I explained the valuation in simple, undeniable terms: revenue streams, growth trajectory, and market penetration. I mentioned our spacious Portland office, the 38 full-time employees, and the hundreds of American manufacturers we partnered with. Mark interrupted before I could finish the breakdown of our Q3 growth. Look, Jane, you got lucky with this online thing. That's great, but some of us have been building real careers with actual qualifications. He emphasized the last word, glancing at Heather, who nodded stiffly. It's not luck, I responded calmly, though the heat was rising in my chest. It's 7 years of working 18-hour days, solving complex logistical problems, and building something meaningful. We've helped save dozens of American manufacturing businesses that were on the verge of closing. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice tentative, almost pleading. That sounds impressive, dear, but I still wish you had finished your degree. Education is important, even with this business. I felt my patience snap. I pressed on, pulling the large envelope from my bag. Actually, I brought something for Dad. I slid the retirement, investment, documentation across the table. I wanted to ensure you both have a comfortable, worry-free retirement. Robert opened the envelope. His initial skepticism darkened into a furious crimson as he realized the magnitude of the gift. Rather than gratitude, his face was contorted in what could only be described as pure, personal outrage. What is this supposed to be? Some kind of charity? He dropped the papers, scattering them across the white tablecloth. We didn't raise you to throw money around like you're better than everyone. That wasn't my intention, I pleaded, leaning forward. I just wanted to help, the same way I helped with Mom's medical bills, Mark's house down payment, and Sarah's wedding. 3 heads snapped up simultaneously. My carefully guarded secret financial assistance, the $350,000 foundation, was suddenly brutally exposed. The silence was deafening, the air thick with instant betrayal. You. Robert sputtered, his voice hoarse, pointing a trembling finger at me. That was all you. Sarah looked mortified, her cheeks burning. Mark's expression hardened, transforming his handsome, lawyerly face into something ugly and defensive. Eleanor simply looked confused, staring blankly at the scattered papers. You've been secretly paying for things behind our backs, Robert continued, his volume rising with each word, his voice now shaking with pure, volcanic rage. Playing the big shot with your internet money. This is not how we operate as a family. I was just trying to help, I replied, my voice shrinking against his fury. I never wanted recognition. I just wanted to support the family. Support? Mark interjected, his voice dripping with venom. By making us look like charity cases? Some of us work honest jobs with actual degrees, not getting rich quick with online schemes. It is not a scheme. I insisted, feeling the conversation spiral violently out of my control. I fought to ground the argument in reality. I built a legitimate business that helps American manufacturers reach customers. We employ dozens of people with good salaries and benefits. Robert shoved his chair back, the harsh scraping sound a final declaration of war. His napkin fell unnoticed to the floor. You drop out of college against our advice. You disappear into your little internet world. And now you come back throwing money around like you have all the answers. You think your money makes you successful. He leaned across the table, his eyes burning with a deep-seated, generational bitterness. You are still just uneducated trash who got lucky. Anyone can get lucky. I worked my entire life the right way. I got an education, built a respectable career, raised a family. I will not be shown up in my own home by my dropout daughter. The room fell silent once more, except for Eleanor's soft, horrified gasp. She finally whispered, Robert, no, but it was too little, too late. Mark looked down at his plate, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corner of his mouth. The look of a sibling who just saw the inconvenient competition decisively eliminated. Sarah appeared torn between her embarrassment over the exposed charity and her agreement with the traditional values her father represented. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse, my hand shaking so violently I had to grip the strap tightly. The physical blows from his words couldn't have hurt more. I scanned the faces around the table, searching for an ally, a flicker of compassion, but found only cold judgment and averted eyes. No one met my gaze. Their loyalty, I finally understood, lay not with me, but with the established order, the sacred blueprint of the college degree. Happy birthday, Dad, I whispered, turning toward the door. Yes, you should go. Robert spat, his voice cracking with finality. Get out of my house, you lowlife. Your money doesn't make you part of this family. We have standards. No one followed me out. No one called. As I pulled away from the curb of the house I grew up in, blinded by hot, furious tears, I realized that I hadn't just been rejected. I had been fundamentally exiled. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. Yet I was speeding toward a hotel room in my own hometown because my family had just deemed me morally and intellectually beneath them. The truth was out, and I hadn't bought respect. It had bought contempt. The drive to the downtown hotel was a blur of streetlights and overwhelming emotion. I had to pull over twice when the tears became too much, clouding my vision and stealing my breath. In the sterile, impersonal silence of the hotel room, the cruelty of the past hour replayed relentlessly. Had I misjudged the dynamic? Had I been too arrogant? Had I, despite my best intentions, been trying to buy the love and approval that only came with a diploma? The financial help, which had felt like an act of devotion and care, now felt like a desperate, foolish attempt to purchase a seat at a table that was never truly open to me. I pulled out my laptop, my hands still unsteady, and started to do the only thing I knew how to do when facing chaos: document. I began compiling every single cent I had given my family over the past years, meticulously tracing the transactions and accounts I had used to obscure the source. The list was brutal, not in its size, but in what it represented. Eleanor's cancer treatment, $90,000 paid directly to the specialists and hospital. Mark's down payment and renovations, a total of $145,000 over 2 years, initially for the house, followed by a subsequent loan for an upgraded kitchen he desperately wanted. Sarah's wedding and honeymoon, $60,000, covering the venue shortfall and secretly funding their 2-week trip to the Amalfi Coast. Robert's small expenses, $25,000 for his car repair the previous winter and $40,000 for the new roof he'd needed after a massive storm, which he boasted he paid for by savvy investing. The total soared past $360,000. Money I never expected back, given freely out of love, all rejected in a single, hateful burst of fury. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Dad's still upset, but he'll get over it. You know how he gets when his authority is challenged. You coming in and basically showing off your money was insensitive to the rest of us who worked hard for our careers." No apology, no acknowledgement of the horrific words spoken, just an immediate, defensive shift of the blame onto me. I, the victim of a vicious verbal attack, was now the insensitive perpetrator. I deleted the message instantly. Then came a text from Mark. "Family is family. Let's move past this." Again, the expectation of immediate capitulation. They expected me to absorb the abuse, apologize for being successful, and return to my designated role as the quiet, slightly embarrassing relative. The next morning, I contacted Dr. Richardson, my longtime therapist in the city where I usually lived. She scheduled an emergency virtual session. "Family wounds cut deepest, Jane," she observed, "especially when they target the very thing you worked hardest to overcome." Over the following days, Dr. Richardson helped me analyze the complex power dynamics. My success, she explained, didn't just challenge Robert's worldview. It threatened his entire identity as the provider and authority figure. My financial help, far from earning gratitude, had actually ignited deep-seated resentment because it highlighted a shift in power they were not prepared to accept. This deep dive into my childhood revealed how profoundly I had internalized their low expectations. Despite my $25 million company, a core part of me still believed I was the family failure, the dropout who always had something to prove, which explained my reluctance to be open and my need to support them financially without recognition. It was time to rewrite the script. 2 weeks after the dinner, I made the decision that felt both terrifying and unbelievably liberating. I would prioritize my self-respect over the toxic family dynamic. I wouldn't just leave, I would relocate my life. The luxury beach house I had purchased the previous year in Boca Raton, Florida, as an investment property, would become my primary residence. Before I left Portland, I wrote a final letter to my parents. It wasn't a rant, it was a measured, honest expression of my pain. "Dear Mom and Dad, I have spent years seeking your approval and respect. I supported our family financially while minimizing my success to ensure no one felt uncomfortable. Despite building a $25 million company that helps preserve American manufacturing jobs, I was made to feel like the family failure because I chose a different path than the one you prescribed. When Dad called me uneducated trash and a lowlife, it wasn't just cruel. it revealed how you truly see me. No amount of success will ever change that perception. I cannot continue a relationship where my worth is measured by credentials rather than by character and achievement. I will always love you both, but I need to create distance for my own well-being. I hope someday we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. Love, Jane. I sealed the letter and mailed it myself. There was no response. Meanwhile, back in Portland, the silence in the Wilson house was heavier than the $360,000 secret it had absorbed. Robert Wilson was a man built on concrete certainties. He had always been right, and his truth was the family law. But Jane's final, quiet exit, the sudden absence of her presence, and the sheer, verifiable amount of money she had secretly pumped into their lives had opened a hairline fracture in his foundation. He found himself sitting alone in his recliner, staring at the conspicuously large TV Mark had bought, the TV Jane had likely paid for indirectly through Mark's house fund. He remembered Eleanor's harrowing cancer diagnosis and the quiet terror of facing ruin until the insurance settlement arrived. The thought that his lowlife daughter had saved his wife's life, that she had literally kept the lights on and the family afloat while he sat in judgment, was a bitter, indigestible pill. The pride that was his bedrock now felt like a gilded cage. He had worked his entire life to be the provider, the ultimate authority. Jane's success and her secret generosity hadn't just challenged that role, it had made it obsolete. He was forced to confront the chilling possibility that the daughter he had rejected had not only won the argument on success, but had won the argument on character. Eleanor was quietly suffering. She retreated into herself, overwhelmed by the realization that her silent compliance had enabled Robert's cruelty. She stopped reinforcing his traditional views, instead focusing only on the small, quiet sadness of Jane's absence. The only person who seemed fine was Mark. He called weekly, discussing his promotions, and even scoffed at the idea of Jane moving to Florida. Good riddance, Dad. The fewer distractions, the better. She'll be back when the money runs out. But even Mark's certainty failed to soothe Robert. He was beginning to see his son's entitlement, Sarah's superficiality, and his own moral bankruptcy in crystal clear, horrifying relief. Robert Wilson, the unwavering rock of principle, was cracking under the weight of his own monumental mistake. The ground was shifting, and he was alone to feel the terrifying tremor. 3 weeks into my new life in Boca Raton, Florida, the unexpected happened, bringing my family story full circle in a way I never could have anticipated. Boca Raton was a world away from Portland. Warm sunshine, salt-scented air, and luxury around every corner. My beach house was a modern 2-story sanctuary with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Gulf Coast. I had spent the first few weeks making the house mine. I replaced the soulless, luxury hotel decor with handcrafted pottery, custom textiles, and original art from the very artisans Artisan Bridge supported. Making the space authentic was my form of therapy. I established a routine. Sunrise walks on the beach, coffee at a local Cuban-American cafe, and remote work from my oceanfront deck. My executive team noticed the change. "You seem more centered, Jane," my operations director observed during a video conference. "More confident in your decisions." He was right. Without the perpetual, corrosive shadow of my father's criticism, my business instincts flowed freely. Then came the publicity blitz. The Boca Raton Business Journal ran a major feature on local business movers. My friend Eliza, an art gallery owner I'd met, texted me early one morning. "Page 3. You're going to want to see this. Huge profile." There I was, photographed on my deck, the headline screaming, e-commerce innovator brings $25 million business to Boca. The journalist had done a deep dive, detailing Artisan Bridge's journey from startup to massive valuation, our impact on sustaining American small businesses, and crucially, the recent establishment of the Jane Wilson Entrepreneurship Scholarship Foundation, an entity I had created at my old community college in Oregon to mentor students lacking traditional advantages. I hadn't authorized the story, but public records don't lie. The article was picked up by major national business publications, shared extensively on LinkedIn, and went viral on Facebook. Former high school classmates suddenly remembered our friendship. Teachers claimed they had always seen my potential. Most impactfully, small business owners from Portland began messaging me, thanking me for representing the unconventional path. "You inspired me to finally launch my business," one wrote. "If you could build something so substantial without a fancy degree, maybe my idea has merit too." The news eventually traveled back to Portland. The local paper there ran a condensed version. Local dropout turned entrepreneur makes national impact. The irony was suffocating. The same community that had quietly enforced my family's disapproval was now celebrating me as a hometown success story. The first sign of the inevitable family reaction came through extended relatives. Friend requests from cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. Then the text from Eleanor. "Saw the article about your company, dear. Very impressive. Your dad and I are so proud." No mention of uneducated trash. No acknowledgement of the 3 weeks of exile. Just a casual claim of pride that had been conspicuously absent when I sat across from them at the dinner table. The following day, Robert's voice message arrived. His tone was artificially jovial, strained, and filled with a brittle kind of forced enthusiasm. "Jane, big news about your company in the paper. Always knew you had it in you. Listen, there seems to have been a major misunderstanding last time we spoke. Call me back when you can." A misunderstanding? That was his characterization of calling his daughter a lowlife and ordering her out of his home. 3 days later, Eleanor texted again. "We're thinking of visiting Florida next month. Would love to see your new place. Let us know if that would work for you." The message landed like a stone in my stomach. They wanted to parachute into my hard-won sanctuary, as if a 2-week news cycle could erase a decade of judgment and an evening of cruelty. My healing was about to be tested. The text from my mother, the casual assumption that everything was fine and a visit could be arranged, forced me to confront the core of my trauma. 6 weeks of deliberate, painful healing, of building a new life free from the need for their approval. And now they wanted to simply appear on my doorstep. I immediately scheduled an emergency virtual session with Dr. Richardson. "They aren't reaching out because they've had a moral epiphany, Jane," she noted calmly. "They're reaching out because your public success made their private rejection socially and emotionally untenable. They need to reconcile their family narrative with the public facts." She helped me frame my response, emphasizing that this was an opportunity to set the ultimate boundary, not to seek validation. "You have to make it clear that the price of reentry into your life is the acknowledgement of the harm done and a commitment to mutual respect. No pretending it never happened." I texted Eleanor back. "You and Dad are welcome to visit, but before we can move forward, we need to have an honest conversation about what happened at his birthday dinner. Please let me know if you are open to that kind of discussion." Her response was immediate, yet still troubling. "Of course, dear. We just want to put this behind us and be a family again." The desire to put it behind us without addressing the core conflict was a classic avoidance tactic, but I had issued the condition. I confirmed the dates, arranging for them to stay in a nearby resort, preserving the sanctity of my home for the initial meeting. As the day approached, I prepared meticulously, both practically and emotionally. I mentally role-played the difficult conversations with Dr. Richardson, practicing setting boundaries without becoming defensive or falling back into the mode of the desperate-to-please daughter. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I met them at a bustling beachfront restaurant, a public, neutral setting designed to keep initial emotions moderated. Robert and Eleanor looked smaller, less intimidating than I remembered them in the rigid confines of their Portland home. Robert was dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks, Eleanor in a structured dress, both outfits better suited for a church service than a beach lunch, a silent testament to their inability to fully relax outside their prescribed roles. "This place is something else, Jane," Robert managed, gesturing vaguely at the turquoise water visible through the windows. "You've certainly done well for yourself." The subtle emphasis on yourself didn't escape me. The implication that my success was isolated, unearned by traditional family standards. "Thank you," I replied simply, letting the awkward silence settle. Eleanor immediately jumped in with anxious small talk about the flight, the weather, and how different Florida was from Oregon. I answered politely, but refused to carry the conversational weight. Finally, after the food arrived, Robert cleared his throat, his face flushing slightly. "About what happened at my birthday dinner, things got a bit heated." I met his eyes steadily. "You called me uneducated trash and a lowlife, Dad. You told me to get out of your house, and that my money did not make me part of the family." His flush deepened. "I was surprised by the news about your business. It caught me off guard. I may have overreacted. Not an apology, an excuse. I need to understand," I continued, holding his gaze, refusing to let him retreat into justification. "Was that reaction about me sharing my success, or about learning I had been helping the family financially?" Eleanor interjected quickly. "It felt like you were showing off, Jane. Like you were saying you are better than us now." "I never said or thought that," I countered, keeping my voice level, focusing on the facts. "I spent years hiding my success to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. I helped financially because I could, and because I wanted to support the family I love." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Well, the way you presented it was very forward. And finding out you were behind those other things, it felt like charity. We never asked for it." The conversation continued in this strained, painful vein throughout lunch. No genuine, unqualified apology emerged, only justifications and attempts to minimize the severity of what had transpired. The subtext was crystal clear. They were here because my public success made rejecting me impossible, not because they had truly reevaluated their assessment of my worth. As we finished the meal, I made a critical decision. I would show them the house, but not as a plea for approval, as a statement of fact. "I'd like to show you my home," I stated firmly. "But first, I need to be very clear about something. I will not pretend the dinner never happened. I will not accept being called names or having my choices denigrated. If you want a relationship moving forward, it has to be based on mutual respect. That is non-negotiable." They exchanged nervous glances before Robert finally nodded, stiffly. "That seems reasonable." When we arrived at the beach house later that afternoon, the change in their demeanor was instantaneous and profound. Their expressions as they took in the expansive ocean view, the modern, custom-designed space, the quiet luxury, the sheer, undeniable reality of a successful life, told me everything. The $25 million valuation was no longer an abstract, funny math internet number. It was manifested in beachfront real estate and elegant, tasteful stability. It was irrefutable. "This is quite something," Robert finally managed, his voice tight, all the bluster and certainty momentarily drained from him. "Would you like a tour?" I offered, leading them through the open living spaces. I pointed out the handcrafted pottery from a Vermont partner, the custom-woven textiles from a North Carolina artisan, and the original artwork I'd commissioned, all sourced through Artisan Bridge. As I showed them the home, a profound revelation washed over me. Their approval, which I had sought for so long, no longer held the power it once did. I was proud of this home and the business that made it possible, regardless of their reaction. The validation I needed had come from within. I had achieved autonomy, and that inner strength was worth more than any apology they might offer. I realized I was running the conversation now, and for the first time, Robert Wilson was listening to his daughter. We sat on the deck as the setting sun painted the Gulf sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink. The conversation that followed was difficult, spanning hours, yet it was absolutely necessary. "I want to be clear about something," Robert began, his tone more conciliatory than I had ever heard it, the public display of wealth having finally subdued his inner resistance. "I am sorry for what I said at my birthday. It was uncalled for, regardless of how surprised I was." The apology was welcome, but still qualified. His focus remained on his experience of surprise, not the emotional harm his words had caused. "What hurt most," I replied gently, looking out at the glittering water, "was that those words seemed to reveal how you truly see me, despite everything I have accomplished." Eleanor reached across the table, this time actually touching my hand. "We have always been proud of you, Jane. We just worried about your future without a degree." "My future is right here," I said, gesturing to the house and the business it represented. "I built it without a degree, but with 7 years of working harder than most people ever will. That deserves respect, not condescension." Robert, ever the traditionalist, tried one last defense. "The business world can be fickle. Companies rise and fall overnight. We just wanted security for you." "I understand that concern comes from love," I acknowledged, offering a bridge. "But there is no perfect security in any path. Plenty of people with degrees struggle financially, while others without formal education thrive. What matters is recognizing there are multiple, valid paths to success." The evening concluded without a dramatic, tearful reconciliation. Instead, we reached a fragile, conditional understanding, a starting point, not a conclusion. "Moving forward," I concluded, "I am open to rebuilding our relationship, but with clear boundaries. I will not accept being demeaned for my educational choices or having my success attributed to luck rather than hard work and skill." They agreed. Robert's reluctance was still visible in his tight smile, but Eleanor seemed genuinely receptive, perhaps recognizing for the first time her role in enabling the toxic family dynamic. After they returned to Portland, I reflected deeply. The healing process was far from complete, but significant steps had been taken. I maintained limited contact with them, brief weekly phone calls that gradually became less awkward. My relationship with my siblings evolved differently. Sarah eventually offered a sincere apology for her role, and we slowly rebuilt a connection based on adult friendship. Mark remained distant, occasionally texting generic holiday greetings, but never making a real effort to acknowledge the damage he'd done. My personal healing continued with Dr. Richardson. "Success is not a substitute for self-worth," she reminded me, "and family approval cannot be purchased, no matter how much you give." This insight allowed me to set clearer boundaries in all my relationships And, most importantly, I learned to give from a place of genuine generosity, rather than as a transactional attempt to buy acceptance. I had finally, truly moved on. The year following my move to Boca Raton marked the final, crucial chapter in my journey towards self-worth and genuine reconciliation. Artisan Bridge continued to thrive, but my focus shifted from relentless growth to philanthropic impact. The Jane Wilson Entrepreneurship Scholarship Foundation became the center of my giving. I didn't just fund tuition. I developed a mentorship program, pairing students who demonstrated raw entrepreneurial potential with successful business owners who also lacked traditional degrees. Witnessing their growth, their confidence bloom, brought a satisfaction deeper than any amount of family approval ever could. My life in Florida flourished. I expanded my friend circle, creating a true chosen family based on mutual respect and shared values. Accomplished women in their 30s and 40s who valued my present achievements, not my past credentials. My weekly dinners with Eliza and our group became a source of genuine joy and unconditional belonging. I had 2 rescue dogs now, Charlie and Luna, whose uncomplicated affection was a daily, grounding reminder of what relationships should feel like. Back in Portland, the ripple effects of the Boca Raton Blitz and the conditional visit continued to work on Robert Wilson. The silence from Jane wasn't punitive. It was simply the reality of a self-respecting adult maintaining a boundary. For a man obsessed with control and tradition, this lack of control over his daughter was torture. He found himself secretly following the news about Artisan Bridge, reading articles about the jobs Jane created, and watching the community college's press release on her scholarship fund. He realized the cruelty of his words had been compounded by their sheer inaccuracy. Jane wasn't trash or a lowlife. She was a significant job creator and a philanthropist. His identity, once built on the rigid pillars of the corporate ladder, now looked petty and small next to the real-world impact Jane was making. The change in Robert came slowly, not with a bang, but with a quiet internal shift. It was a realization that his traditional measure of success, the degree, was a shield he had used to hide his own fears and insecurities. He was forced to grieve the loss of his old, rigid identity and accept the reality that his daughter was teaching him a new definition of legacy. One evening, Eleanor found him staring at the framed diploma on his office wall, not with pride, but with a strange, contemplative sadness. He finally confided in Eleanor, "I was wrong. I thought I knew what success looked like. I mistook my fear for wisdom. I hurt her because she challenged my entire life." This was the true, happy ending for the elderly, not a magical cure, but the grace of genuine, late-life wisdom. Months later, Robert reached out again, not with an apology for the dinner, but with a request to understand the Artisan Bridge model. He asked questions about supply chain, tax implications, and employee benefits, the substance of her work. He was asking for professional advice, implicitly acknowledging her competence. I sent him the full financial report, and for weeks he studied it. The breakthrough came a year after my move. Robert sent a short, typewritten letter. "Jane, I reviewed your foundation documents. It's an exceptional structure. You've used your wealth to support the very type of people you are. People like you. I admire that. I am proud of the woman you became. Not because of your money, but because of your grit and your character. It's a better legacy than my career ever built. Love, Dad." It was the most honest, unqualified acceptance he had ever offered. That Thanksgiving, I hosted them in Boca Raton. Robert looked around the table, not with judgment, but with an open curiosity for my new, chosen family. He still wore his button-down, but the tension was gone. He was finally a father seeing a successful daughter, not an accountant judging a college dropout. Our relationship will always require boundaries, but the love is no longer conditional. I had found my authentic path, and in doing so, I showed my father that respect is earned by building, not by dictating. The uneducated trash had built a bridge, an artisan bridge of resilience, respect, and unconditional love, a foundation strong enough to finally hold the entire family. Thanks for listening my story.